I know there's still some people that it's hard to break them out of the break room. But Dana is in there with his chimes, and I expect them to be here very soon. We're not going to wait for them. We will be starting within about a minute. Thank you very much. John. Hey, John. All right, I'd like to call us back to order over here. So if everyone could please take their seats. I wish we had a speaker out in the break room so they could hear us too, because they don't seem to hear when we go through there. Anyway, hello in the back of the room. If you could please take your seats, we would appreciate it. There'll be time to speak with each other and network in the very near future. So right now, I'd like to restart this event by introducing Mr. Sergey Manovsky from the New York City Mayor's Office of Long-Term Planning and Sustainability. A very, very hardworking man. He's shaking his head. No, he is. And astute and hardworking, and we are very lucky that he's here to talk with us today.
Steve, thank you very much. It's really an honor to be here. First I'd like to thank the Commission and Chairman Brown for setting up this technical conference. It couldn't be more timely in the wake of Sandy and also right before the summer's rate cases. And we appreciate that you've taken an opportunity here to hear not only what the city has to say, but also consumers, DG technology developers, and the real estate community and environmental stakeholders. One of the big questions facing New York State and many other state public utility commissions across the nation is how to value distributed generation in a way that's fair for ratepayers and also improves the reliability and environmental footprint of the power sector. So in many ways, you're in the unenviable position of figuring out the right balance of rate design and incentives and interconnection rules. So I'll leave that to the other experts today. Instead, I've been asked to represent the city government's standpoint on distributed generation and why we feel there's a compelling public policy case to be made for more DG in the sector. I think DG is going to play a key role not only on climate mitigation and resilience, but also the bottom line, there are a number of good projects out there on the table that as policymakers, we should figure out a way to come together and figure out what tools of government we can use to unlock those private investments. So I'm going to talk about three things. First is I'm going to give you a quick overview of our sustainability blueprint, otherwise known as Plan YC. It's a 5-year anniversary since Mayor Bloomberg pulled together all the city agencies to build this blueprint. I'm going to talk a little bit about, in the wake of Sandy, how we view DG and other investments, and then ultimately some preliminary policy recommendations. I'm going to leave, again, some of the details to the experts down the road. So what's the role of city government here? We represent about 10 to 15% of the load in all of New York City. Many of the biggest single customers of the utilities in the city are critical operations such as city government-owned wastewater treatment plants, hospitals and schools. We also spend almost $1 billion a year on energy in our municipal energy budget. And so that means we devote a substantial amount of time in our group to really understanding how the grid operates, incentive programs, emissions profiles, and ultimately our own municipal asset base, and how we can lower our emissions and our energy and control our energy bills. We devote about 10% of our annual energy budget to projects to improve energy efficiency in government buildings and distributed generation to reduce our carbon footprint. And I also want to thank, and I see a lot of friends here, Con Edison, I see Bob Scamenti and Margaret Jolly, and I also want to thank Claude Trahan's group who've been, working with us, over the past number of months. We essentially have been camped out at 4 Irving Place, so thanks for your graciousness and working with us. I think that, I think we're laying the groundwork here for not only the utilities and regulators and city governments to work together, I think in the public interest, and I think New York State has an opportunity to be a leader here. So, so I think we're seeing a tremendous amount of innovation in the energy sector. I think New York is really right in the middle of many of the national energy issues of the day, and that goes from top to bottom, whether it's the future of nuclear and coal and gas, down to how you incentivize distributed generation and energy efficiency and integrate renewables into a dense urban environment. So I think this is a really exciting time. I think when it comes to DG, we have a lot of unique both opportunities and challenges in New York City in a dense urban environment like we have. I'm going to give you a quick update on where we are with Plan NYC and how DG fits. And I'm going to talk about a couple of initiatives that are related to energy, climate, and emissions. It's a 5-year anniversary, and we're going to be issuing a progress report in the next couple of weeks detailing what's happened in the city over the past 5 years, the fact that sustainability teams are now embedded in all agencies, what's worked, what hasn't worked so well. And I think one theme is that cities actually have a very important role to play in energy policy making. When you think that 50% of the global population lives in cities, that's going to grow to maybe 75% within the next 20 years. And there are some unique, as I said, unique opportunities and challenges in urban environments. And there's no easy choices, and there are always tough trade-offs. So if we look at the drivers really for Plan NYC, just to set the groundwork, really the idea is how do you improve the quality of life of New Yorkers under the assumption that we're going to have potentially 1 million more residents by 2030. Where are people going to live? How are they going to travel? How are they going to, how do you ensure that the air is clean? And so really the Plan NYC blueprint is really about quality of life, but really through the lens of sustainability. And if you look at climate change, really since 2007, the idea has been how do we reduce the city's carbon footprint by 30%? With cost-effective measures, and then where will those reductions come from? And then ultimately, since 2007, we have been thinking about climate resilience. Namely, we're a coastal city, 530 miles of coastline. How do we plan for and deal with climatic and extreme weather events? And which was obviously underscored by the tragic events of Sandy, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. And I think the approach, and I think this is important for us because as we advocate for certain policy positions, we would like to argue that, if you look at what we do in our team and across the mayoral offices and the agencies, really the hallmark of Mayor Bloomberg is really to look at science and have policy driven by data and the best research available. In this case, we've assembled world-class panel of experts on climate projections and climate science. When we monitor air quality, work with the Department of Health to really look at neighborhoods and how they're affected. Second, when we look at strategies, we focus on the low-cost, high-impact strategies. For example, if we look at our building stock, you'll find that almost 50% of energy is consumed in 2% of the building stock. So you want to focus your policies where it's cost-effective. And in other cases, we have, for example, residual fuel oil still being used in the residential commercial sector, and that's really 1% of buildings create most of the pollution in the city. And then finally, I think the idea is, the tools of government are not just regulatory. There are many tools of government, and we think that really unlocking private sector initiative and really trying to identify where the market failures are, whether it's informational, having clear rules, whether it's financing or technical resources or long-term workforce skills. This is something I think that we've spent a good deal of time on. So let's look at New York City real quick. This is a carbon footprint of New York City that we calculated. And you can see there's a couple of interesting things here. One is, first of all, most of our emissions come from stationary sources. You'll see that transportation only comprises roughly 20% of our carbon emissions footprint, and the rest is in energy consumed in buildings. And this is roughly flipped from other cities like Los Angeles and Houston, which have a greater transportation footprint. The other thing to notice is refined petroleum products are used not only in on-road transportation, but in residential, commercial, and institutional buildings, which is, in some cases, highly polluting number 6 fuel oils are still used in buildings. We also don't have a high penetration of renewables within the city itself. So a couple quick observations there. So what's our sustainability blueprint? Well, the idea is to reduce emissions by 30% by 2030. And if you look at the pathway there, and that assumes some amount of growth, most of the efforts of city government really have been looking at energy efficiency policies, but also clean energy supply and distributed generation. And we're looking at what the potential might be for even deeper carbon reductions and what sectors would be most cost effective to focus on. Distributed generation has been a goal since 2007 in the city. It's an explicit goal. The idea originally was, and this was based on some basic engineering analysis back in 2007, of an 800 megawatt potential citywide by 2030. And that was back in the 2007 document. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the other policies that we have that also touch on DG. Our Greater Greener Buildings Plan, as I mentioned, if you look at our CO2 emissions by sector, buildings account for almost 80% of carbon emissions. That's the left pie chart. On the right pie chart, you'll notice that this is mostly concentrated in large buildings. Heating, lighting, and cooling comprise almost 50%. In large buildings, comprise almost 50% of total city's carbon emissions. And we think there's tremendous potential for distributed generation options there, as well as traditional energy efficiency options. Our citywide benchmarking, and this is really an effort to understand energy consumption at the building level through annual disclosures of energy consumption for buildings over 50,000 square feet. We see that there's a significant degree of variance between lowest performing and highest performing buildings. And one of the ideas here is the most energy intensive buildings use 3 to 5 times more than the least intensive. And if you can bring some of that lower quartile up to the median, that would be a tremendous benefit to our carbon footprint and energy costs for the city. And roughly 2 billion square feet of real estate have been benchmarked. That's the equivalent of all of San Francisco and Boston combined. And the statistical distribution here, I think, is quite striking. Another area that we have spent a great deal of time on is air quality. And this is our so-called clean heat program. And the idea is, as I mentioned earlier, number 6 fuel oil still contributes, on a stationary burn, contributes to more than half of the particulate matter pollution in the city, contributed to asthma rates and emergency room visits. And so one of the key programs in the city, and it's not often you can move the ball in the energy sector fairly quickly with relatively straightforward policies, but the idea is that if we can phase out number 6 fuel oil and provide technical resources and financing for building owners to switch to other resources, whether it's number 2 or cogen or biofuels or other resources, that you can actually reduce, and this is a graphic here that shows the regulatory part of this reduces emissions by, that's the blue, by some amount, but really the bringing together the financing options and the technical resources that we've got, we think we can reach a 50% reduction goal by the end of this year. And so this is one of the programs I think we're very excited about. The other element here is mayor's carbon challenges. So back in since 2007, we have asked 17 leading universities and 11 of the largest hospital systems to voluntarily track their carbon emissions and agree to a goal of a 30% reduction for their institutions within 10 years of signing on to the program. And if you look at that, that's 3.5% of citywide emissions are within these institutions. And there's a long list of them here. My main point here is that that there's been a tremendous amount of interest in these organizations coming together and sharing ideas and technical resources and voluntarily reaching this carbon reduction. We have expanded this just a couple of weeks ago to some of the top commercial tenants in the city. Some global corporations have accepted the challenge. And I think the key thing here is we've already, just 5 years into the program, you can see some early achievers. People have met the bar of 30% reduction already way early. So why am I saying this? There's a reason, and it's because there's no magic bullet. Every institution, every building owner will have a different approach. In some cases, cogeneration was an option. If you look at NYU or Montefiore Medical Center and others, cogeneration was key for that target. In other cases, it was fuel switching, HVAC upgrades, or better behavioral understanding through sub-metering and building energy management systems. So it's a combination of things, but we think that cogen and DG can be one key piece of this. Another part is financing. So the New York City Energy Efficiency Corporation was created about 2 years ago, and really the idea is there are segments of the building sector that find it difficult to find financing for deep retrofits or for DG. And this organization is a not-for-profit, really leveraging ERA funding and other philanthropic resources to not only help building owners do deep retrofits, but do fuel oil switching. And recently, cogen was added to this portfolio of projects, and three projects have either closed or I believe all three of them have closed. So cogen is now part of this financing package. It's a small organization, but we think this could be one of the ideas is there are some segments where the counterparty risk is either too high or the transactions are too high for traditional lenders, and this NYSTATE can play an important role. Now, on to climate resilience. Obviously, we all know what happened during Sandy. I'm not going to go into details on this except to say, the city has been working on the issue of climate resilience now since 2007. And we have a panel of world-renowned climate scientists who have been advising us, and we have a climate adaptation task force comprised of all the utilities and critical infrastructure operators to really look at what every foot of elevation would do to their equipment, and really trying to look at cost-effective solutions. Of course, Sandy hit, and the numbers are pretty staggering when we think about 43 people tragically died, more than 800,000 customers cumulatively lost power, and wastewater treatment plants and the telecom sector also got hit pretty hard. And if you look at the trajectory of the outages, at peak we had more than 630 customers without power, and we did see a tail in recovery. Once the underground system had recovered, then we had the overhead system took a bit longer. And then we also had what we're calling customer-sided outages, where this is unprecedented storm where you had flooding that also affected customer equipment. So you have a gray area there between the utility and the customer in many ways, and some of the long tail was caused by that as well. So that's something to be mindful of when we're talking about DG and can it be helpful? Well, within a couple weeks, we're going to be issuing a report. The mayor asked Seth Pinsky from the Economic Development Corporation to lead really a citywide team looking at what happened during Sandy, what might happen based on the latest climate science, and what are the cost-effective measures to mitigate against that. So DG will figure prominently in that report. And there are some CHP assets in the city that fared well. We had hospitals that, in this case, I believe a hospital that was not in a network where there was outages, but accepted patients evacuated from other hospitals, and it's always good to have that second layer of defense with the CHP unit. NYU, with more than 13 megawatts of gas-fired CHP, and Co-op City, just a couple of examples of facilities that fared well in the storm. Now, what could happen in the future? Well, so this is our group of institutions that have been advising us for a number of years now, and we reconvened them to really look at taking the International Panel on Climate Change information and really regionalizing it and trying to understand what it means for New York City and the region. And these are some preliminary results that I think are quite striking. If you look at two different categories, one, extreme weather events, and then chronic risks, I think as we think about energy infrastructure, two things come to mind. Heat waves, we're going to see more frequent heat waves, and I think perhaps more disconcerting, longer heat waves potentially. The 2 to 3 day type events might turn into the 3 to 4 day type events already by the 2020s. And so that's something that I know Bob and the folks at Con Ed have been looking at. And also, when we talk about chronic risks, you know, if you look at the outer boundaries of what our climate scientists are saying about sea level rise, and this is not final, this is preliminary, but something under 3 feet could, you know, is kind of order of magnitude that we're talking about. Again, not final, these are preliminary results that are being in the process of being updated right now. But these are the kind of risks we face, including increased precipitation, higher humidity. And the other part of this is, well, you know, 530 miles of coastline means that, you know, most of our critical infrastructure, and that means, you know, wastewater treatment plants, in some cases public assistance housing, and energy infrastructure happens to be also in the 1 in 100 year floodplain. So that includes, you know, in-city generation capacity is about a third of it right now is in the 100-year plain. Most of it will be in the 100-year plain by the 2020s, 2050s. That doesn't mean that that equipment isn't necessarily protected. It really depends on a case-by-case basis, but it is something that we have to be aware of. And then, of course, transmission-level substations, you know, increasingly large elements of the utility system will also be in the floodplain. I know our friends at Con Ed have been thinking around the clock on this issue, and we're going to be commenting on that as well during the rate case, and we're working, I think, very productively with them. But it is a challenge for a city. How much money do you spend on hardening versus other types of investments and in the utility infrastructure? Sorry, did someone turn? I don't know if that's my phone. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Let me just turn that off. Sorry. All right. Oh, geez, I'm one of those people. Sorry about that. Okay. So this represents a significant challenge. One question DG developers have is, you know, how did the gas system fare? And from our standpoint, the bulk transmission system did very well. Let's say we have 4 pipeline systems serving the city or the vicinity, and by and large, the high-pressure system fared well. We also have 2 new gas pipelines that the city has been supporting in the FERC EIS process. One is the Spectra pipeline, which we believe will be online later this year, and then the Williams-Rockaways, we hope, would be serving a National Grid service territory within the next couple of years. And that would help on the high-pressure system, increase more options, and more city gates, and more options for the utilities, and as they also build out their gas distribution system and regulating stations. So I'm not going to get too far into that, except to say most of the problems in the gas system had to do with the low-pressure system and also the customer side. So not the higher pressure systems that would be feeding cogen. So then to get to the topic du jour here, let's see. They're going to haul me off in a second. All right, so DG. Let me just get into this. So let me talk a little bit about city government assets, because this is first where we put our money where our mouth is. We have a goal of reaching a 30% carbon reduction by 2017, which is a more aggressive target than what we've placed for the city at large. And cogen is an important part of that. there's something called Local Law 1, which mandates that city government evaluate, essentially screen all government buildings over, I believe it's over 500 kilowatts, for opportunities for DG. And we just reissued that report recently. And so it's a screening tool for us to help determine, looking at both thermal and electric loads, where we can place some of our investments. And I think we have a couple of really good projects underway. And so right now we have roughly 31 megawatts of DG investments underway, and roughly 22 megawatts remaining to meet our goal. And a couple ones to mention are wastewater treatment plants. Again, one of the largest loads in the city, citywide. We're looking at really moving that capital stock, so basically we can reuse some of the effluent gas that's produced there and create cogeneration facilities. North River Treatment Plant, for example, is one. I think it's a fantastic project. At City Hall, we have a fuel cell under development. Rikers Island, a 15 megawatt CHP unit. And I think and I'm not going to get into all the details here, but I think that we work with the Public Service Commission on Rikers Island. I'm going to let Bob Lockney speak to this in more detail on campus-style tariff, which really enabled that project. And I'm going to finish off with something that, by popular demand, the city really pulled together some of the leading lights in DG and cogen to really think about what the barriers are, what the perceptions and the realities are in the cogen sector. And we have obviously our friends both in the utility sector and the regulatory sector, as well as some of the big developers. And really the idea is looking at existing tariffs and regulations, financing barriers, information barriers, and piloting needs that where we could play a helpful role as city government. And I'm not going to get into too much detail. I'm going to leave this to Bob. But we have on the regulatory side, I know you're going to be speaking about standby rates and interconnection rules and tariffs. On the informational side, we believe that some of the policies that we have in place, whether it's our Clean Heat program or our carbon challenges or our own CHP projects, could play an important role in helping the sector understand where the best opportunities are. Financing is another area where our New York City Energy Efficiency Corporation is working. And on the technical side, I think we want to use municipal buildings as really a living laboratory to look at some of the best ideas, not just for cogen, but other distributed generation options, looking at how to interconnect, looking at where we can test bed new technologies and figure out how to integrate loads even better. So I'm gonna leave it there and let some of the experts speak to the details on incentives and regulatory issues. And thank you very much for having me speak.
Sometimes things work. I'm saying that as somebody who they don't always work for. There we go. Deja vu, right? Sorry about this. I just could not find the right spot. Here we are. Okay, we'd like to move along right now with I think this is going to be somewhat of a hot topic. I'd like to introduce Liz Grizzaro, who is one of our staff in the Office of General Counsel. will be moderating this panel on tariffs and regulations affecting CHP. We have some very well-known, I think, people up here, people who are experts in the field from staff, and people from different areas of the CHP world, developers. We have utility people, and we have Liz, who's walking down the stairs. Are you going to sit over there? Okay. Okay. Want to sit over here? Okay.
Thanks, Steve. This is, again, I'm Liz Grisaro. I'm an attorney with the Office of General Counsel of the Department of Public Service, and thank you all for being here. I'd like to not stand here for this panel, because I think it'll be more, we'd like this to be a very interactive session, so I'm going to sit over there for the balance of the discussion. But you have here a collection of folks with deep and practical experience with CHP. With no further ado, I'd like to start with the folks from DPS. Jason and Marco will go first. I was hoping that we could hear from them and then invite you guys to give us some initial round of questions, and then we'll turn to some of the other presenters and do a follow-up round of questions at the conclusion of their presentations. So that's my proposal for how to proceed, and why don't we start with Marco. Thanks.
Is this on? Yeah. Excellent. This is where the program gets exciting.
Tariffs.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the tariffs and programs that affect the development of CHP on a real high-level perspective of some of the things the Commission has done over the last 10 years or more in order to promote CHP and DG from the perspective of tariffs and incentives. From a rate design perspective, we're going to talk about standby rates, a little bit about electric standby rates and the steam standby rate. And from the incentive program perspective, just touch on some statewide and company-specific incentive programs. So the Commission started thinking about standby rates back in early 2000 when it adopted principles for the utilities to follow in the development of standby rates. The intent of the standby rate, if some of you are not aware, is to have a rate that reflects what it costs for the utility to serve the load of the building when the generator is not there to serve the load. It has both a contract demand rate and also an as-used daily demand rate. And I want to hear a lot more discussion about that from everybody as we go along. Each of the utilities developed a cost allocation methodology and tariffs in compliance with that Commission order back in the early 2000s. The intent was to have a cost-based rate, not to provide an undue incentive to CHP or DG, but to really attempt to come up with something that's truly cost-based. It involved the development of cost allocation matrices, and also it included, on a utility by utility basis, exemptions for certain technologies. I would note that over the years, mostly in rate case processes, the standby rate has been re-examined, whether it be a party coming forth and asking for the Commission to take another look, or through a joint proposal where parties agreed to take a look on a collaborative process. But I'll admit, in general, the rate has not changed significantly, except for in 2011, when at the request of the city came forth in specific for Con Edison, was looking for a rate, a revision to the standby rate in which they would be able to apply the standby rate on a campus-style approach. That being that if you had multiple buildings on a single parcel, and one of the buildings had a DG or CHP installed, the tariff allows the ability to offset that generation output against the metered load of those other buildings in the campus. We think this has been a significant improvement and one of the revisions that will help to expand CHP and DG. Essentially allows for virtual net metering on a campus-style setting. Aside from electric, the commission has also adopted backup/supplementary steam service rates for Con Edison Steam. The rate design follows very closely the rate design on the electric side, has both a contract demand and at daily as used demand charges. There have not been any recent modifications to that tariff rate. We move to gas rates. Around the same time as the commission was developing standby rates on the electric side, it also saw a need to take a hard look at the rates that were being charged for the gas service that's going into these facilities. Some of the benefits that the commission recognized in adopting specific rates for DG, CHP is that these new units could offer promise of increased electric reliability, power quality, efficiency, affordability, may reduce the need for new electric transmission and distribution facilities, and also it's an additional gas load that is able to spread the existing fixed cost of the gas facility over another customer, which is always good for the rate payers in general. More recently, regarding the gas standby rates, the gas rates for CHP, the commission recognized and clarified that the gas used for both the gas turbine and the gas used in a HRSG are both eligible to receive the what we call the DG service rate under Con Edison's tariff. Again, in that order, the commission recognized that it has a policy of supporting distributed generation technologies, and it saw that its adoption of that or clarification of that rule or tariff help that out. Let's talk a little bit about incentive programs. So you set up the proper tariff structures, both on the electric side and the gas side, and also the commission recognized, hey, what other ways could we offer revenue sources to DG, CHP, and also have them recognize the benefits that that facility is providing to the system. Back in '04, specifically in the Con Edison rate case, the commission adopted a system-wide DSM program. Did I go ahead?
No.
Yeah, I gotta go ahead, right?
Keep going.
Sorry. A system-wide DSM program as well as a targeted DSM program that specifically was looking for permanent peak load reduction. And in those programs, DG, CHP was eligible to receive incentives if you located in one of those specific areas and provided a permanent demand reduction. One of the important factors here is that these programs were able to account for the deferred T&D project that Con Edison was able to defer by getting that permanent load reduction. It adds an added benefit when looking at the cost benefit of these specific projects. Later in '09, the commission adopted peak shaving demand response programs for Con Edison. These are programs that pay participants for reducing load the next day when Con Edison expects its peak load to be within 96% of its summer peak. This is an additional revenue source available for DG CHP that could be also provide significant benefits to the system and help the economics of your project. A little bit on the steam side, in the '09 steam rate case, the commission established a steam customer-sited supply program. This was intended to address Con Edison's reaching a critical point where the need for steam capacity was kind of right on the edge. And if we're able to reduce steam peak load, Con Edison could avoid a significant investment in a steam plant. So to do that, if you could sell your steam back to Con Edison, and Con Edison could avoid building another steam plant, benefits the steam system and gives the CHP project an output for your steam, allowing you to perhaps operate in the most efficient point, having both the steam and electric generated at a critical point. Lastly, in the 2007 EAPS proceeding, more recently, an order in that case provided a significant funding for CHP, as NYSTATE talked about earlier today. And that concludes my presentation.
Thanks.
I'll pass
Thanks,
it over
Marco.
to
Is this
Jason.
on? What do we do? Okay. Great. And can you switch and move to Jason? Who has control over the slides at this point? There we go. Great.
Morning. I'm going to provide a high-level summary of the standardized interconnection requirements for New York State, the SIR, and what's included. What's included in the SIR are intelligent rules developed collaboratively. The utilities implement the rules, DPS staff and the PSC enforce the rules, and resolve conflicts. What's included in the SIR, it defines the application process and deadlines, defines technical interconnection requirements, applies to 2 megawatt systems and below, contains model contract language and applications, and there's a certified equipment list information in there as well. The connection is governed by the utilities, and safety is the primary focus. The DPS has a website specific for DG and SIR. On that website, it can be located at the link above. We have our certified equipment list. There's also the actual SIR document is located at that site. DPS staff and utility contact information is there, so if people need to reach out to a utility or to staff ourselves, our information and email addresses are there, as well as electric tariff and standby rates information, links and contact information, as well as other interconnection and DG information located on that site. For CHP interconnection specifically, CHP projects 2 megawatts and below would follow the SIR application process and technical requirements. For CH projects above 2 megawatts, if the project is not providing power for resale or into the market, no existing guidelines are in place, and the utilities would work with the customer would work with the utilities representatives on the process and technical requirements. DPS staff would provide support and dispute resolution. If selling power for resale into the market, applicants would follow the FERC interconnection guidelines, the SGIP, and would work with the New York ISO on process and technical requirements. Again, safety and reliability are the 2 main goals in either scenario. Another topic that I know was brought up earlier, but specifically for CHP, the only net metering allowed at this time, per the New York State Legislature and the Public Service Law, is micro CHP for residential customers, up to 10 kW. The SIR is revised periodically based on changes to the net metering laws through legislation, and as well as through updates and modifications to the process. The latest revisions to the SIR had just occurred in March of 2013. What we'd like to do today is hear more information or questions from the CHP community as far as what we can do to improve the SIR and help development of CHP. And that concludes my presentation.
Great, thank you very much, Jason. And that is very much what we're hoping to hear back from all of you here. We very much want to have dialogue with folks and stakeholders in the community. We want to understand your questions, what works, what doesn't work. And so with that in mind, does anyone have any questions for either Marco or Jason on any of the DPS presentation? Not seeing a giant show of hands.
Can't see anything.
Actually, I can't see anything, that's right. Oh, wait, we have a gentleman in the front. Yes, sir. I think you may have to use the microphone for the folks who are on the internet.
My name is Khalid Yusuf. I'm a principal energy engineer with Pyramid Energy. Quick question here. Why is it 10 kW for CHP, but 2 megawatt for wind?
I'll answer that one. The CHP that is allowed is a special program just for residential customers. It's targeted to a very small technology that was being developed and targeted to homes. And it was not intended at the time it was adopted to have any larger implications. It was just going to be limited to these small specialized package projects that you could install in a residence. The larger question of CHP in more commercial applications simply didn't come up at the time it was adopted, and it's now a policy issue that's open to discussion.
Len, that's Len Van Ryn, also with the Department of Public Service. Len, is that, the source of that is basically a statutory limitation?
Yes,
Right.
it's right in the statute.
Right, so it's the sort of thing that department staff can't really change since the legislature sets the policy.
Liz,
Yes.
Reuben Brown from E-Cubed and chair of the regulatory committee of NYSTATE. The best practices guide that the Regulatory Policies Committee has just completed on net metering policies across the country piggybacks on the Interstate Renewable Energy Council's best practices guide and adds to it an evaluation of the CHP net metering policies in 18 states that now exist. The smaller system criteria that was in effect for the New York 10 kilowatt level, in that era there were other states adding 30 kilowatts to the level. Maine actually in 2009 took the micro combined heat and power terminology, applied it first to 30 kilowatts for the small systems and an efficiency rating of 80% efficiency, but then applied it up to 660 kilowatts at a 65% efficiency. They then went ahead and adopted the definition of efficient CHP system to apply to everything eligible up to 5 megawatts that was related to variety of public policy criteria. So they took a definition out of the net metering realm, applied it to a broader realm. They just declined expanding the 660 kilowatt to 1 megawatt this session, but phased the bill over to a study process in the legislature there to raise it to a megawatt or beyond. New Hampshire's legislature last year established 1 megawatt, or actually 2 years ago, established a 1 megawatt level and 65% efficiency for net metering. And this year is in the process of moving on a group net metering bill. So there is tremendous material available to consider a legislative review, and I apologize for bringing this forward right now to this group because they're not legislators, but I think the industry needs to focus on what they could do for the next legislative season and get these kinds of issues in front of policymakers. Thank you.
Yes, I want to underscore that because as much as we want to hear about how we can do what we do better, there are limits. They're baked in by the legislature, and so folks may need to look there for some of the solutions. Are there any other questions for?
One more.
Is there one? Oh, yes, sir.
I'm Bob Panora from Tecogen. This question is for Jason, and it has to do with eligibility for feed-in tariffs or net metering. What I've noticed in interconnection systems that we've done in the state, unlike other states, that doesn't seem to be a process for simplified interconnection that really is practical or exists in the real sense. And what's troubling to me is that if we were able to get eligibility for net metering or something like that, that the requirements here still preclude that because you need to have reverse power relays at the point of common coupling, if you will, of the building. So there's the simplified interconnection that would exist in other states that allows us to be installed without that requirement doesn't seem to exist here. And therefore, we would never have the ability to net meter in a practical sense. So that's my question. Is there going to be any movement in that regard for a simplified process, for CHP?
I mean, the process we had just gone through to update the standardized interconnection requirements that went into effect April 1st, we did have a collaborative session with, public entities and utilities and so forth. And, to my knowledge, that wasn't brought up as being a major concern. So it wasn't, included in that. But going forward, we'd, be happy to look into something like that.
Well, thank you. It is an important aspect of it, and I think it's a real impediment to installations if you have to work on that extra relay. But anyway, I'll rant more about that this afternoon when I'm on the panel. Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, my name is John Moynihan with the Burstone Energy Center. And my question's for Marco. So you spent some time talking about the contract demand and as-used daily demand charges. You referenced the Con Ed territory. I was wondering if you had any involvement in reviewing the National Grid rate case from a few years ago, where those changes took effect, I think, in January of 2012.
I did not have any involvement in that, in the National Grid case.
Okay, because the end result of that is it actually cost me more money in delivery charges to National Grid in 2012 than it did in 2011 when my plant operates the exact same. So what happened was the as-used daily demand charge went down by a healthy amount, but the contract demand went up by a larger amount. So the fixed charge that I pay the utility every month got larger, and there's no way I can do anything to avoid that number because it's set in stone. The as-used daily demand charge number went down, but that's the number that I can control by smart operations of my plant. So those are the types of, maybe it's an unintended consequence that flies in the face of trying to make these projects more economical around the state.
What size is your plant, sir?
3.6 megawatts.
I can't comment on the specific rate design changes that took place in National Grid. I apologize for that.
That certainly is the type of thing we could look into in the future. And it always helps if someone can bring it to our attention beforehand rather than afterwards. It's easier to fix beforehand.
Right, and that's, as someone who operates a facility, I'm a little negligent on going to every rate case hearing. I'm trying to keep the facility up and running. But if there's an avenue for me to make a note here, I'd like to do that.
Yes,
And
indeed.
that's important too. I mean, we have to, in rate cases, we have to facilitate participation for people who are interested in this issue and simply don't have the time and resources to be bogged down in everything else.
Thank you.
Sorry, do we have any other one in the audience with a question for this group? If not, I think we should move along. I'd like to start, I think, with Mike Burns, if you're willing to go next.
Yeah, I think I'm going to stand up because I can't see what is behind me, so. And I also left the presentation right smack in the middle of my desk, so I don't know what it said. Yeah. I'm Mike Burns. I'm with Source One. We are energy consultants. We've been here in New York City for over 10 years, full-time, and in business for 15. We have 70 energy professionals. We work a lot on any kind of an energy issue, a lot with distributed generation. I came out of the power plant business, and that's a large part of what I still do. So we do owner's rep services, we do feasibility studies, we work a lot with the tariffs, a lot with the backup tariffs, with Margaret at Con Ed, with the other folks at Con Ed, and with end users. We're owned by Veolia Energy. I have to give the corporate plug. We sold to them 6 years ago, and they are the largest owner-operators of district energy systems and cogen projects in the world. Not as big in the U.S. as they are in the rest of the world, but still very large. And they purchased Source One because we have a lot of customer contacts. So anyway, without further ado, want to touch on two things, and I think we've already touched on them a little bit. The technical interconnection issues, and the commission was exactly right on that, and also the tariff and backup issues. And I have some strong opinions. I came out of operations like this gentleman here. That's why I asked about the size of his plant. But I'll get to those. And I'm sure people, I know Margaret has strong opinions too. We go back and forth. On the technical, I think we already touched on this. Under 2 megawatts, it's fairly straightforward. They do have a standard interconnection. Over 2 megs, you deal with Con Edison. If you're here in Manhattan, Manhattan in particular is tricky because they have the network system, and it's not as easy as a radial. So you have to deal closely with the counterparts at Con Ed. I think I said be nice to them. I had 5 years at Con Ed. I know what those guys do. They do a great job in general. Little backup. This is the glory days of cogen in New York compared to the way it used to be. My old boss did a small cogen project at 11 West 42nd Street, first one in Manhattan, and they did that like in the early 70s. And this was before PURPA, before the federal government got involved. And when they were finished, Con Ed said, you want a cogen? Fine. They came and they pulled their transformer out, and the building ran completely islanded for many years. And that was the old days. We've since gone 30 years later. It probably took another 20 years to get another cogen built in Manhattan because Con Ed really wanted no part of it. The backup rates were horrific if they existed. 2003, we fixed that quite a bit. Still not perfect. I still question whether they belong there at all. But in general, we're much better off than we were. And I think everybody in this room believes that we do want to move the industry forward. I think I covered that. We can get into more detail. Con Ed has some major, real technical issues with some of their substations down here with fault current. They have a map for the entire network for each one of the 5 boroughs, and it tells you which one of the networks you can easily connect to and which ones are going to be more difficult. And that has to do with the fault current contribution, and if you have a fault current issue where you're going to connect, it's going to require you to put mitigation in, which is going to raise the cost of everything you do. And the larger the plant is, the larger that cost will be. So that is an issue, but Con Ed's working to address it. I don't think there's much that can be done about it except you engineer around it. And that cost for that falls on the developer. And it is a problem with a lot of projects. A lot of these projects are, probably out of every 10 I look at, maybe 3 will really need a detailed screening. 7 of them are, cogen's not going to work at all. You don't have that thermal dump. You don't have the right interconnect. It's just not going to work. So when you get down to the 10% of projects that work, a lot of them are not slam dunk economically. They make good money, but if you start loading on more requirements, both in backup tariff, paralleling gear, all that stuff that we need, it really hurts a lot. So these are all these little things that we're picking on all affect how much the 800 megawatts we want to get to in the next 20 years. Fault current. So the way to get an interconnect is to really understand the system. Understand your counterparts at Con Ed, get to them early, talk to them, give them a complete package as you're ready to go forward, let them comment on it, allow plenty of time, get good advice. I mean, there's a lot of people in the business, and there's more people coming in all the time that haven't gone through this process enough. And Con Ed, like everybody else, every overburdened bureaucracy, the guys that give them a full, complete package will get the attention right. If you don't do that, it gets kicked to the bottom, and then you're back at the beginning of the queue. You get a letter back and fix this, fix this, fix this, and then you go back through another 6-month process. So do the right thing, hire the right people, and then you'll get moving forward. And allow plenty of time and money. Hire source one. What do I have here? Oh, these are your backup tariffs. This is the electric side, I believe. Yes. So this is interesting, and I had forgotten one part of it that I saw in Margaret's presentation. So if your contract demand is over 15% of the building, meaning if you've got a 1,000 kW building and you put 150 kW plant in, you're required to go on the backup tariff, except for right now we have an exemption that goes through 2015 that you don't unless you're over 1 megawatt. So that's what I said here. I didn't go into enough detail because I forgot about the 2015 date. In 2015, that drops to 50 kW. Right, Margaret?
Well, it's currently 50 kW.
With the exception. But the exception expires in 2015.
The technology exemptions expire.
Correct, which is almost all CHP projects that anyone would want to build. That technology exemption is your cogen project has to be 60% overall cycle efficiency. With that gone, every little small Tecogen project, Capstone Microturbine, every one of these guys is going to go on the backup tariff, which is going to put an additional burden on, more audit trail, more analysis. It's just going to make things harder. There's a collaborative going, the city's DG collaborative. We've asked to continue that exemption, raise that exemption, or what I would ultimately love to do is get rid of the entire backup tariff. I don't think it's necessary. Every other utility in the Northeast has already done away with them. You just go on your otherwise applicable rate. If you're SC9 rate 2, you stay SC9 rate 2 and you buy less electricity. If you trip on an awful lot, you pay high demand charges under the tariff. So, the annual maintenance payment, I know Bob's going to talk about that and some other people. That's still 10% of the cost of the interconnect. You pay that for the rest of your life. It's another burden on the cogen developer and the project. Steam is the steam interconnection issue is major here in Manhattan, south of 96th Street, which is all your major buildings, all your big buildings, UN, World Trade Center, Empire State Building, most of the hospitals, that the steam tariff is exceptionally, and this is, the electric tariff I can understand, and there's some debate about whether it's really more expensive. Steam tariff is absolutely more expensive. It's punitive, in my opinion. If I sell 1 pound of steam to Con Ed, they insist that they have to back up the entire building, even though I was buying the other 1,000 pounds from them already. Shifts me to another tariff, doubles the cost of my steam I buy on the backup tariff from Con Edison. And the commission, it's been raised to the commission many times. I think they would rather defend the steam system than encourage cogeneration on the steam system. Any steam we take off is steam that Con Ed can't sell. So they're making the money back on the backup tariff. But it's by far and away the biggest impediment to doing projects in a building that has Con Ed steam. Gas issues, I think those were redone 10 years ago, also in 2003. Those tariffs are actually very favorable. The gas system, they've got very good tariffs for distributed generation. It's called Rider H. As long as you maintain a high load factor, you can get very favorable rates. That actually does encourage cogeneration here in the city. My short summary, basically what I said. Smaller plants can get built fairly straightforward right now. They've done enough of them. Margaret will show you some slides of how many she's put in over the years. Larger plants in Manhattan, in the 5 boroughs, require a lot of interaction back and forth with Con Ed and a lot of analysis, because there's lots of expenses you don't know about and lots of time that you haven't anticipated. And that's mine. Liz, did you want to take questions now, or do you want to go through these other three?
If you don't mind, I think we'll keep rolling, and Bob Lafney's volunteered to be our next speaker. I'll try to be in charge of the clicker. This is a challenge. I'm going to ask the engineer to help me with figuring out how to, work
It's the right button.
the right button is forward? Okay, got it.
Good morning, everybody.
There we go.
My name is Bob Lockney. I'm an attorney with Couch White, Albany law firm with an office in New York. I've been doing this for more years than I'd like to think. I've been working on DG projects on behalf of customers and also developers for more than 20 years, and that's upstate and downstate. So I've got a pretty good perspective. I guess that's why somebody asked me to be on here. And I'm also been involved more recently with the New York City DG initiative, which some people have talked about. So in the course of the work that I've done, but also the DG initiative, I've been able to identify some issues, regulatory issues that I think are pertinent to the discussion we're having, and I'm going to talk about some of those today. I guess I'd start with background is that Governor Cuomo, in his State of the State, spoke very highly of the need for more DG, quoting that it helped resiliency on the system. This is post-Sandy, so the governor was very much in favor of it, and also Mayor Bloomberg has spoken very positively about DG, and actually Sergey spoke earlier and noted that the city has aggressive targets for DG by 2030. With that background, I guess the thing that caught my eye in Margaret's presentation was that I believe we have 150 megawatts of CHP in the ground now, and that the queue is only 30 megawatts. So the targets that the city has are looking pretty remote, and kind of, I think, would cause people to look at what are the problems and how do we jumpstart the industry, and that's one of the things I'm going to talk about is some of those issues. So I want to talk about the regulatory issues affecting CHP. These issues come up all the time. I've been doing this for long enough, and I'm always surprised that I can read a tariff that, and I won't pick on Con Edison, but I mean, the utility attorney will read the same tariff and will come to directly opposite conclusions. And you'd be surprised at how often we have to go to the Public Service Commission to get the issue resolved. Rider H is a great example. Just in the last year, Con Ed informed some customers who were on Rider H that they had reinterpreted the tariff and that the tariff no longer provided the discounted service for the portion of the CHP plant that was not making electricity. It was just the heat recovery steam generator. So we read the tariff, and I worked with Mike on this, and we had to go to the PSC to get a ruling to say, yes, the tariff says what it says, and the entire project is covered. So, but anyway, the point is that these issues come up all the time.
Can I jump in on that?
Sure.
Just on that Rider H issue, this plant was up and built and operating under those economics for 2 years. And out of the blue, a letter comes from Con Ed, says, we're taking you off the tariff, and it's going to cost you an extra $100,000 a year. Fortunately, this customer of ours, both Bob and I, had enough deep pockets to afford to hire Bob to go to the commission, and we fixed the problem. But this is, Con Ed, they kind of, I think every once in a while, they lob a bomb and they say, let the commission decide.
Yeah, and that's the point, is that I guess the other point is that it gets expensive. I mean, there's these issues, they build in extra costs because you have to go to the commission for a ruling, and you have to pay for the attorneys and the consultants to go forward. And I guess I'm arguing against my own business, but it ought to be easier. Let me just say it that way. So I'm going to cover a couple of regulatory issues: electric standby, gas service upgrades, electric interconnection agreements. I do want to get into microgrids a little bit because that issue has come up again and again in the DG initiative as something that a lot of parties believe is something that has to be expanded in order to get the kind of penetration we're looking for. And then I have a couple of slides on New York specific issues, New York City specific issues. I'm not going to go over, with respect to standby, I mean, Marco described the tariff well. And, you know, what happens, he said that it gets revisited in the rate cases, and it does in the sense that the utilities are asked as whether or not they're still complying with the rules that were set up in 2003. I guess the question, and I raised it in the slide, is that those rules were established in 2003, and nobody's really looked at the fairness of how those costs, how those rules were set up in a long time. So to me, it seems to be, and the other part of it was that, and I was there at the time, when those rules were set as to how you allocate the local costs versus the upstream costs and how much gets in the contract demand versus the as-used demand, it was part of a settlement agreement that ended a process that was as ugly as anything I've ever been in. I mean, there was people.
As a participant, I'll vouch for that.
Right? So, you know, you wonder whether it isn't time to take another look at this, because I don't know that anybody could look at the standby rates and objectively say, yes, that's the cost of service. Those customers are being charged what the cost that they impose on the system. And you can't do that unless you go back and look at the underlying assumptions that were set in 2003. On gas service, this has come up a couple of times where customers, obviously, when they're putting a CHP system in, might need additional gas service. And the tariff has very specific rules about what the customer's rights are, how you pay for it. There's a revenue test that says that if you're going to be contributing so much revenues, you may not have to pay anything, or you may be able to pay for it in different ways. All of those things are things that a developer and or customer really needs to know, because you know, the utility is not under any obligation to tell you what you're entitled to, and so you need to read the tariff yourself or have somebody read it for you. Even issues such as, you know, whether it's a gas main versus a service line have come up, and, you know, there's arguments there. So again, I think it's just an issue that I think developers and customers need to be aware of, that the tariff is could be a friend. Electric interconnection agreements, these are the agreements that allow the CHP facility to connect to the utility. They are very complicated. They're somewhat one-sided. I mean, the utility has drafted them. Anything above 2 megawatts is, you know, you get a draft of the utility's agreement, and you start working from that. And some of the agreement is set by tariff, so, you know, some things like indemnifications and who's responsible for damages, et cetera. You don't have a whole lot of leeway because the tariff has certain rules that the utility imposes on you. I think, you know, in terms of the interconnection agreement, I think some of the things are, you know, just trying to make sure that you get reasonable estimates up front. That's one complaint I hear all the time, is that, you know, the estimate will be, well, it could cost up to $2 million to interconnect you. But that's not a guarantee. There's no cost, you know, there's no ceiling there. So it's hard to get firm estimates. And then I think the other big issue is getting a schedule that can work well. I know that, and I will say this, working with Con Ed, they work hard at this, and I think some of it is just that it's hard to do up at the very beginning of these projects. But from the customer standpoint or the developer standpoint, it's kind of hard to plan a project unless you have a really good, reasonable understanding of what the interconnection costs are going to be. I think the one other thing I want to talk about with respect to interconnection agreement is this O&M charge. Mike said it's 10%, but it's actually 12.1%. And in the Con Ed service territory, I can't say what it is everywhere else, but and in the current rate case, the proposal is to increase that to 12.7%, and it is a charge that is there. You pay for the interconnection agreement through the interconnection agreement. You pay for all the equipment to be installed, and then you pay this O&M charge. It's a fixed percentage. As Mike says, it's there as long as you're there. So, and it can end up being quite a hefty charge. It was raised, I think, during the DG initiative that the city had going as one of the concerns that a lot of developers had. Wanted to turn a little bit to talk about how you provide service to multiple customers. The PSC has issued a number of rulings in the past. Generally, they were single customers and single customers with multiple facilities. So over time, there was a series of cases, rulings by the PSC that pretty much determined that you can provide service to more than one building. You can provide service to yourself crossing a road. And then the rulings were expanded in a case, and it involved the Burstone project that John Moynihan was talking about. And this was a project up in Oneida County, New York. That project, and that's my drawing, it's up there, if it's up there. Yeah, that's a beauty. No engineer would ever take credit for that.
Isn't that built
But
into Microsoft?
I think he gets the point across. But Burstone, the CHP facility, is located on the grounds of the hospital, St. Luke's Hospital. There's a healthcare facility, or actually it's a long care unit, healthcare unit, right next to it, and then across it's a 4-lane state highway, I believe. Across the way is Utica College. So the question which came up at the beginning of the project was, we would like to serve these 3 facilities. Looking at the PSC precedent, you couldn't say you knew that the CHP developer could absolutely do this. And so the process is you file a petition for declaratory ruling with the Public Service Commission, asking for them to say, yes, you are exempt from, you're not a utility, you are a qualified cogeneration facility, and you can provide this service. And it was somewhat of a landmark decision in that it was the first time they had ruled that you could cross a road and serve another customer, actually 3 customers all told. But it didn't, it's like a lot of things, it didn't come easy. We had to go to the PSC twice with petitions asking for clarification, because we got some pushback from National Grid on the issue of whether or not, if you did this, would those customers be entitled to standby service. So they were taking the position that only one customer, the hospital, would get standby service. So again, I think it's one of those things where, and I'll talk about this later, where there's a need for more clarification with respect to what a microgrid is, how you can serve more than one customer. Coming out of that case, coming out of the Burstone case, there's some questions that I don't really know the answer to, but I guess the PSC will have to answer them at some point. How many customers can be served by a QF? How widespread geographically can the QF be? What does it mean to be a related facility, and what does it mean to be at or near the project site? And then another question is whether the rules, the same rules would apply downstate in the city, for example, because it's just a different area, obviously much more densely populated. There's probably a lot more opportunities in the city for multiple customers to take service, and it would probably be a very beneficial thing to do. But I don't know that we've gotten that far yet in the city where you have a Burstone type situation, and I assume it will be coming soon. Okay, so just touch on a couple things, and some of these have been brought up already, but New York City specific issues. The campus style tariff was discussed, and that was the result of a petition to the PSC by the city to expand an existing tariff that was only applicable to one customer, or only has one customer on it, I should say, so that the city could build this facility at Rikers Island. And Con Edison, first of all, the PSC ordered Con Edison to do it, to file a tariff. Con Edison filed a tariff, and then numerous parties filed comments on the tariff. The tariff that it ended up, the commission changed the tariff that was filed by Con Edison in a number of material ways. It reduced the proposed per account customer charge. It expanded the definition of what the customer's premises means. It eliminated a proposal to not allow the customer to sell excess electricity to Con Edison under SC 11. So those are all good things. The one thing that was asked of the commission that they did not do was to eliminate the single customer limitation. So as it is now, if you want to do a campus style connection with Con Edison, you can only do it for yourself. You you can't have a neighboring facility that's owned by somebody else and do it. And when you think about it logically, if you're going to allow two buildings that are right next to each other and owned by the same customer to do this, why can't you allow two buildings, the same two buildings, if they're owned by two different people? Why can't we work it out so that there's a way for those two customers to proceed? I think it would open up possibilities for customers and developers, because the thing I hear over and over again in all these meetings is you've got to be able to find thermal loads that match the electric load. So sometimes you need to find somebody who's got a constant thermal load to support the electricity design. So I guess that's one question that maybe, I'm sure Margaret will have some thoughts on it, but that idea of why this should be limited to a single customer, and maybe that's the next step, is to expand this to multiple customers. I talked about Rider H, and don't think we need to do that. It was, but it was an example of, where the customer had to get involved because the utilities reading of the tariff was just so different from what the customer was, and ultimately the commission issued that order. I guess on standby, one thing to make folks aware of is that when the commission approved the campus-style tariff, they said that Con Edison would have ultimate authority to override the customer's contract demand. The way it is under the current standby tariff is that the customer can set its contract demand. If you underestimate it and violate that, you're subject to all kinds of penalties. And I'm not aware of a major crisis here. I think customers try to do the right thing and set it because the penalties are so steep. But when the campus tariff was approved, the commission granted Con Edison the override right, and in the current rate case, Con Edison is looking to expand that override right over to all standby service. So even if it's not a campus-style tariff, the utility would have the right to override your contract demand. I guess just in terms of the key takeaways, some of this, nothing really comes easy. I mean, there's the tariffs, the interpretation of the tariffs are often a subject of dispute, and getting those issues resolved can add costs and delays. So it's something that you almost have to plan for. One of the things I think that the PSC might be able to do with regard to this is to try to set up some sort of an informal dispute resolution process, so that you don't have to file a complaint or file a petition, and you end up with, it's usually a 5 or 6 month delay from start to finish by the time the thing gets noticed and people put comments in. So that'd be something that maybe you'd ask the PSC to comment on. I think the microgrid development issue is, I think the microgrids are suffering because there's just a lack of clarity as to what a microgrid is, whether you can get it permitted. I think Len could disagree with me, but I think you'd be taking a big risk if you proceeded with a project without going to the PSC first and getting this declaratory ruling, because you could get the rug pulled out from underneath you. And maybe that's an area, again, where the PSC can provide some additional guidelines. It could happen statutorily, but trying to get legislation passed, I think, is much more difficult. But additional guidelines on exactly what it means to be a microgrid, because I think the key to opening up additional CHP development is to allow opportunities for customers to combine their loads and get service. I think that's it. I mean, I thought I already talked about the tariffs and the reviews. The governor's state of the state, he said that we need to review these tariffs and make sure that there's not barriers in them. And I think that, in the course of the current Con Ed rate case, there are a number of parties doing that. But, if there are barriers, I think they have to be addressed, or we're never going to get to the certainly the 800 megawatts is going to be a great challenge to get to that in the city. But even statewide, I think until we get some of these barriers identified and addressed, it's going to be difficult to make the headway that I think a lot of people think should happen. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. And I just want to, Len, did you want to respond to any of Bob's presentation?
Yes,
Great.
and I've been doing this even longer than Bob. I go back to the.
That's bad.
I go back to the initial implementation of PURPA. So that's how long I've been at this. Bob raises some very good points. Turning first to the standby rates. It was a brutal process to get those in place, but a big piece of that was the fact that the CHP community was caught in a jurisdictional battle between the wholesale generators and the utilities over those rates, and that was a major factor in delaying the process. And that litigation went on for a decade, and it's now finally out of the way, so hopefully a fresh look at standby rates wouldn't encounter that problem. The standby rate that was eventually arrived at settlement, as Bob points out largely, is somewhat complicated. You have to manage a contract demand charge, you have to manage an as-used demand charge, and they fluctuate and vary. But as Margaret is going to point out, for some developers, you could actually make money off the standby rate once you figure it out and once you're comfortable with it. While the standard rate is simpler, it could be more costly, and it also has the disadvantage of not properly recognizing the demands that a cogeneration system puts on the electric delivery system. So if the standby rate model that we have in this state can be made to work better for everyone, it's a win-win situation. I mean, a CHP developer can save money, the utility can save money on its distribution system, and everybody could come out ahead. But because it's complex, complexity raises difficulties, and those need to be worked through. And I think a fresh look at how these rates are developed and how they actually work might help in that respect. One thing that happens with, if you're a CHP developer down in the trenches, where do you start? Well, usually you have to start by contacting a utility customer representative who's out there in the field. Many times, especially upstate, I think this is one of the things where upstate and downstate probably differ, a lot of these field representatives upstate really don't have much experience with standby rates or CHP or any of this, and it's a mystery to them, and they'd be more than happy if it just disappeared off their desk. So they often don't have the experience or the resources to really deal with this. And and what happens is it's necessary for them to work up the chain of the utility command, find out what's going on, get back to the customer, and this causes delay. I think this is one area where I and Jason especially can help, because we can intercede with the utility system to try and get things moved along where it's simply a matter of the customer rep not understanding what he or she is supposed to do. And our phone numbers are widely available out there, and you can call us at any time, and we can often expedite matters if it's a simple problem. More of a policy problem is what I'll call the burstone, the campus, the microgrid situation. How many customers can a CHP developer serve? What configurations are legal? What configurations aren't? And again, this is an area where there tends to be some complexity. And it's hard to arrive at generic rules of uniform application because each geographic situation is so different. And what the commission has done over the years is take it on a case-by-case basis. And this goes all the way back to 1984. I mean, when the commission's first ruling on sort of a quasi-microgrid situation involving the Brooklyn Navy Yard, basically, in one of the initial stages of that project, which, as you all know, took a lot longer than that to get built, when they basically ruled that here in this situation, you can have a quasi-microgrid, although no one called it that, where you can serve retail customers from the cogeneration facility within the Navy Yard boundaries. And over the years, that's progressed ruling by ruling till we got to the Burstone case, which resolved a lot of these issues. It established that you could cross a road. It established that you could serve multiple customers. It established that you were entitled to standby rates. So many of these questions were addressed. However, one problem with the Burstone ruling was that when the utility National Grid tariffs came up, the way it was handled to expedite things, it was simply a ruling that nothing in National Grid's tariffs prevented any of this, instead of revising the actual language. So what you do, in National Grid's case, you have a tariff which may still have language in it that discourages CHP and makes it harder to develop. And again, these customer reps are looking at this language, and it's not been changed. And this is one area where maybe a review of the tariffs could assist in removing some barriers. The campus microgrid situation raises a lot of interesting questions because, again, so many configurations are possible. There's one interesting case before the commission right now, and that's the Eastman Business Park in Rochester, New York, where Kodak used to be located. It's almost 4 square miles, and in Kodak's glory days, raw materials went in at one end, and cameras, film, and paper came out at the other. Over time, as Kodak, of course, encountered its well-known difficulties, they started essentially selling off pieces of the park to independent customers. Now, they had a fully integrated utility system at this park. They had, at its peak, they had 200 megawatts of generation. They provided all their processed steam. They used the steam to drive chillers for air conditioning and keeping things cool. They drove compressed air. They made their own liquid nitrogen. They provided all water services. I think they provided 6 different kinds of water, from distilled through waste, or rather untreated water you could use for industrial processes. And it was a marvelous system which they adopted, which they built and adapted mostly for their own use. Now, what happened is when they started selling off parcels of the park, is they provided utility services to the new tenants and new customers at their cost, and they essentially entered into cost-sharing arrangements with all these people, and they now have 12 customers at this park, and they range from the most high-tech, most sophisticated things you can imagine, like building optics for satellites, to very simple, old-fashioned businesses, such as making spaghetti sauce according to a decades-old family recipe. So with the bankruptcy, Kodak doesn't want to operate this system anymore. Instead, they want to become a customer of the system. And when they come out of bankruptcy, they're still going to occupy more than half of this park. So how do you have a workable arrangement? Well, they found a private developer, Recycled Energy Development, which goes back to you might recall the Trigen days. They did NASA District Energy Corporation out on Long Island in the 80s. And this is the same people and their successors. They want to come in and operate this microgrid on a for-profit basis, change it from cost-sharing to for-profit. And this is a very unusual circumstance because what you see in most of these cogeneration situations is you're dealing with one large customer, which is why the default in the campus tariff is to one large customer, because that's simply the easiest way to do it. And now you have the unique circumstance of how do you deal with not only one dominant customer who may have interests divergent from the 12 independent smaller customers, but how do you deal with divergence of interests among those 12 customers? Well, the way it's working out, Recycled Energy first did a contract with Kodak so that Kodak could emerge from bankruptcy. And now they're trying to expand that contract to include the other 12 customers. But you have this duality in that you have to have a master contract that's fair to everyone, but you also have to recognize and meet individual circumstances. And so we're waiting right now while the customers and Kodak and Red reconcile this and bring a final contract package, arrive at a final contract package. Then the commission can review all the circumstances, decide what type of regulation applies, and hopefully the project will go forward successfully. Another aspect of this project is that Kodak's operations, having been around for many, many decades, happen to be fired with coal. And this is a classic cogeneration situation where everything was sized basically to steam load. The electricity is mostly extra, and they make the steam with coal. And of course, with new environmental regulations and very aging equipment anyway, the coal is going to have to be replaced with gas. And how do you finance, develop, and arrange for all the technical changes you need to do this without driving rates to the customers beyond where the park can be successful? So that's another issue that they're going to address. And this is this matter has been presented to the commission. The petition is in. It's case 13M0028. And there, Recycled Energy and Kodak filed their proposed master contracts, which are now under negotiation. And hopefully the commission can resolve this within the next 6 weeks or so. So that's an interesting case on how microgrids might actually work. As to the larger question of what is a microgrid, how are we going to decide what community among customers is necessary to have one, what geographic boundaries apply, those are all open questions. We've been proceeding case by case, and hopefully, I think one of the reasons that the one customer rule was arrived at in the Con Ed campus situation is we felt we just needed more experience with how do you decide what's a community and what's geographically acceptable, so that you don't have a situation, you don't have a situation like they did, back when electricity was first brought to New York City, and you have all these lines crossing all over, and nobody knows what's going where and who's serving whom. So we would like.
Were you there, Len?
What?
Were you there?
Almost.
But I just want to add to what Len's description of the Kodak situation to say, from a policymaking perspective, while we're here and we're trying to figure out how to get CHP onto the system, how to facilitate, what balances are appropriate in order to encourage, the development of the technology. But you also, Kodak is a lesson in sort of a preview of what can happen depending on what choices we make today, and adds to the complexity of the policy-making decisions. Like, well, okay, so if we're going to have these different sorts of communities being served by these new technologies, what happens 10, 20 years down the road when the original set of parties, may be long gone, and arrangements may fall apart? So what do we do about that? And how do we factor that into the policy making today? So if it's okay with you, I think it might be time to come back to Margaret and hear from Con Ed. I'm going to shift over. Let's see.
I have a DG joke.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
So this is a very elite and distinguished group of people that know that DG does not stand for Dolce Gabbana. I also have a NYSTATE joke. This group of people knows that NYSTATE does not stand for the Northeast Combat Helicopter Pilots Institute. So I'm going to, how much time do I have?
How much does she have? Where are we at? No one wears a watch
No one
anymore.
knows? Okay,
Does anybody
good.
know?
So I'm going to go over just a high overview. I think probably most of you know.
2 minutes.
2 minutes?
15.
15? Okay, I'm good then.
And in conclusion.
Just a high level on Con Edison and just what distributed generation is. I think most of you know, but just to sort of refresh what's really different about distributed generation. Some DG stats, where we are, and then I'm going to spend a little bit of time on the standby rates and how we view them and what customers' experience has been with them, and then just where we see all this going. You probably all know that Con Ed is the electric, gas, and steam company. And some of us view the steam system as a very large cogen system that is supplying district steam in Manhattan. And traditional mode of delivering energy, at a distance, a large central station comes through the transmission system, through transmission substations, which are tied to the Eastern Interconnect. Very stable, generally very reliable system. And then what's different about Con Edison is that most of our system is connected on a networked grid. Of some of our system, like most of the rest of the country, is connected on a radial grid. The networked grid provides some additional opportunities and some additional challenges for distributed generation. And then distributed generation, then by difference, is down here at the customer side, meaning that how we operate the system becomes different, how we protect the system is different, and how our operators and planners think about the system is much more dynamic. In terms of looking forward to the amount of load growth that we're projecting out 5 years, there's an impact of DSM and DR, and then additional reductions in our load forecast that we see we can benefit from distributed generation. The numbers that you see are the 1.7% is expected load growth without considering customer-side technologies, and then an additional 4% decrease, 0.4%, sorry, for when we consider DSM and DR, and then another additional 0.2% from distributed generation. I think the slides that I sent out earlier might have been a little confusing. What I was showing was that we have 30 megawatts of actual applications in the queue. A number of the projects that are coming in haven't actually submitted applications yet. These are some of the larger projects that you see up in the northwest section of Con Edison. And these are up at the universities up there and the wastewater treatment plant, which does have an application in. And some of these we expect to take advantage of the offset campus tariff. Just to run through, ICE is internal combustion engine, GT is gas turbine, fuel cell, steam turbine, and microturbine. And where you see the dots overlapping is where we would have, there's a gas turbine that the steam coming out of the heat recovery steam generator is then supplying a steam turbine. So these the forecast, these numbers, the blue dots really comprise another 75 megawatts of projects that we see coming in probably in the next 5 or 6 years. Compared to the current, we thought we were at 150, but when we reviewed some of the projects, about 10 megawatts of those actually are not in service anymore. And so I think it would be helpful for us to understand what's happened with those projects. Some of them actually had been installed fairly recently and apparently ran into some problems. These are the number of applications that have been coming in and projects that are interconnection, large number of PV, but you can see proportionally smaller number of megawatts. And then a big jump in the amount of CHP that was installed since 2008. That leveled off, we think, in part because of the economy and in part because there was some lessons learned, and I think there was sort of a step back to sort of review what do the developers, what do customers, what does Con Ed need to do differently to get ready for that next wave of projects that are coming in. And then these are the 30 megawatts that Bob alluded to. So in the queue, that are actual applications that have been submitted, and in general, applications are not canceled. They do go through the whole process. 500 projects for solar, which constitute almost 30 megawatts, which is well beyond what's currently installed. And then on the CHP side, the over 1 megawatt, there's 6 of those, and 50 that are under 1 megawatt, and you can see the corresponding actual megawatt sizes there. So these are projects that are actually in development right now. So we've heard a lot about standby rates. They were introduced in 2003. I think there's been a lot. We've had 10 years now of working with these rates, negotiations around the rates, and we think that the right balance has been struck. A lot of other work has been done in terms of standardizing the interconnection requirements. And that continues with lessons learned and conversations that we have with customers and developers. And the exemptions are listed here and have been discussed already. In general, the Con Edison's view is that the rates should not be the incenting entity. The incentives come through NYSTATE. Our customers pay for the incentives as a public policy matter, and it's appropriate that NYSTATE develop the appropriate incentives to bring in the technologies, and that the rates be cost-based and not shift cost to other customers. And this has been an interesting slide for us to look at, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time on it. It's breaking down the number of customers that are on various types of standby rates and the number of megawatts. So if we start at the top, there are currently 26 accounts, or 26 customers that are on full standby rates, meaning that they're paying the contract demand and the as-used demand. And that's 98 megawatts of the total megawatts that are interconnected. 117 customers are currently taking the exemption, meaning for the bulk of these are going to be the under 1 megawatt or up to 1 megawatt efficient low NOx CHP. And that's 39 megawatts. 7 customers that would have been exempt have opted in, and that's about 4 megawatts. And I think if the rates were easier to understand, I think a much larger number of customers would probably be opting into the standby rate. I'll have an example comparing the otherwise applicable rate to the standby rate. Just quickly on the gas, rider age gas rates, this shows the number of customers and the number of therms. And for the rate 2, for DG above 5 megawatts, there's also a contract demand component. And then there are 15 customers that are currently on the steam standby rate. So I've drawn some cartoons to illustrate why the standby rates are designed the way they are compared to the otherwise applicable rate. So the otherwise applicable rate, the delivery charges are based on both KW and KWH that are metered. For standby rates, there's a contract demand portion that's meant to cover what we say are the fixed costs. So that equipment that's in the ground to deliver, in general, in this example, that transformer is designed to deliver the full peak use of that particular customer. So the contract demand is meant to cover that peak usage that the customer would actually be using without the generator operating. So that number currently can be either set by the customer, what they think their peak demand will be, or if the utility sets it, it will be based on history. In fact, there have been several of the large DG customers that connected since 2008 did set their contract demand too low, and there were some very significant penalties when they were exceeded by as much as 10% or as much as 20% of where they had set it. I think perhaps maybe there had been some overpromising on the part of developers about how that DG would operate and would only come down for control outages even in the first couple of years of operation. So some painful learning experience there at the beginning. And then the as-used demand portion is meant to recover the upstream costs, the shared costs that are based on how that machine is actually operating on the system. And I won't spend more time than that, and I'll come back to the offset tariff. But right now, the contract demand, if you look over on the right, about 2/3 of the delivery charges are covered by the as-used demand. So that's 2/3 of that delivery charge that the customer actually has control over, as guy up front here was alluding to. And 1/3 is the contract demand, that fixed cost. Some of this was negotiated, and some of it is actually cost-based, based on what's in the ground right now to make sure that that equipment is maintained for what's as used and what's the contract demand portion. And then this is a comparison to the same customer on the otherwise applicable rate we're finding that the load, we know that the load factor of that customer really drives whether they'll do better on the standby rate or on the normal rate. And so a customer that has a load factor of about 60%, that goes towards the tipping point of them really doing better on that standby rate. And this is just an illustration of the offset tariff, how that would work. So look at this picture. Assume the generator's not there. A customer over time has added services, added buildings, added maybe some loads, and Con Edison has supplied new loads, but they're low-tension loads, low-tension connections at various locations around the customer's campus environment. Maybe think about this as a university or a hospital that's grown over time and added dorms, et cetera. The tariff now allows for, rather than the customer having to completely rewire all of their buildings so they're a single high-tension service, which would cost really in the millions of dollars unless they're going to do this sort of rewiring anyway, allows the customer to connect a generator on the same premise to our high-tension system and administratively deliver the energy to the other buildings. So each of these buildings would have its own contract demand, and then the as-used demand would be reduced by the amount that the generator is generating. And as I said, it really is the load factor for a customer, how well they're operating that equipment in relation to their load really does determine whether the contract demand whether a standby rate is going to work for them. So in closing, there have been issues with the contract demand. I think that our customers now really understand that it's important to set it in the right place. When we're talking to customers, maybe that have new projects, of course, they want to have 20 megawatts of delivery, but they don't want to pay for that 20 megawatts of delivery, and that's where the discussion gets interesting. Operations has been mixed. I think there have been some growing pains on both sides, or on all three sides, and I'll include Department of Buildings, Con Edison, Fire Department. All have really been I think we're much clearer than we used to be on what our requirements are, and still, there's still continued improvement that we're working on. And the more projects there are, the more our energy service reps see these projects, the faster they go. And I think this catalog program that NYSTATE has developed is really going to be a game changer, because I think, for the utility, Department of Buildings, customers, I think it really will make it easier. There's still a lot of confusion on one particular technical aspect of interconnection. The maps, the fault current maps were mentioned earlier. I still people who are very experienced doing projects in New York confused about what fault current is and how it's different from export. All of the projects that are in the catalog, all the SKID projects that are listed in the catalog, have this fault current mitigation, and so the technology's out there. We have maps that I think just produce confusion. If you're in a red zone, some people think that means you can't install generation. That's not true. If you're in a green zone, that doesn't mean necessarily that you can connect, and so I'm looking for some help from the community on how to really better explain that, or just make that part of the regular review. Michael was saying that you need to give Con Edison a perfect package. We would prefer actually that you come to us early to talk about some of your conceptual ideas so that we're headed down the right path. And most importantly is to make sure that gas is going to be available, because in some parts of Manhattan, for example, it can cost $2,000 to $3,000 a foot to move a gas line, and that can and has killed projects. So if that's going to happen, you want to know as soon as possible before you get the customer too excited about and engaged with that project. We try to get back to you as quickly as possible with gas. We've gotten better with that with the oil to gas conversions, because we've had to answer those questions much more than we've had in the past. So there is a process in place for us getting back to you fairly quickly on gas availability. We have technical seminars, 3-day seminars. We've had 3 of those in the last 3 years. We do have a DG guide that was based on learning experience. We brought in some of the developers that had worked on projects. Those bulk of projects. And so we have a handbook that was designed really for customers, but is a guide that we're expanding now to cover this over 2 megawatt. It's based on the SIR, but it really gets into more details such as gas interconnection, coordinating with steam, and exactly what kind of studies will be done and what interconnection requirements may be needed. And that's what I'm referring to as the big SIR. Big SIR should be out. I'm going to say soon because I don't want to overpromise, but we've got a lot of really great comments back from our draft, and we're pulling those in and should be able to post that soon. And I think that's it for me. We're always open to hearing what we can do better, and I think this conversation is a big part of that.
Great. And very much thanks to Margaret, thanks to all the other panelists. We have a few minutes before lunch, and now we turn to you. We want to hear your questions, comments, concerns. Do need to find a microphone because we are broadcasting on the internet. But panelists are available. We are anxious to engage with you guys. So yes, sir.
I have one question. I guess this is for Michael because this came up during your presentation. You mentioned the issue of if I build a CHP plant and I want to sell excess steam back to Con Ed, that sometimes that could be canceled out by a standby tariff.
No, excuse me,
Sort
it's
of
not
like the
canceled
benefits
out.
thereof.
They've had that pilot program in place to sell back steam for the last 2 years. They haven't had any customers take them up on it yet. I think we have the first one that may be coming up shortly on that one. It doesn't cancel it out. They don't. The rate they pay is the cost of gas delivered to the city gate, if I remember, plus an efficiency. So it's not huge. So today they're paying about $6 an impound for steam, and they're, which is better than nothing, but
Right.
it's not a huge hit, which is why nobody's taking it up on it.
Well, what if the site where I'm building it wasn't a district steam customer ahead of time? It's straight natural gas. I build a CHP plant and then I'm strictly feeding in to the district steam. I'm never ever taking it out. Is there still a standby tariff in that case?
I believe there is, yeah. It's not a standby tariff, no, because you're just selling.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah,
you don't have to buy back.
Since I'm never ever going to take it back out, I was wondering if that didn't perhaps remove that
Most people-
negative influence.
Yeah, because the rates, the published rates are not high enough that you'd want to sell them steam. You want to, the only time you're using the steam to kind of balance your plant out. So you can use you can run your plant at its most efficient point and use the electric without having to vent that steam or throw it off, in a cooling tower or something.
Got it. Thank you.
On that steam standby tariff, that, just to pick up on Mike's point, that is a very onerous tariff. And I think Mike made the point that the rates are high in order to protect Con Edison's revenues. But I would argue that they are so high that they may force a customer to put in additional redundancy in the CHP system and actually get off of the system. So it's almost counterproductive unless Con Edison tries to hold on to the customer with a special contract. But you can get to a tipping point where the steam standby rate is so high that it forces somebody to do something they wouldn't have otherwise done, which is get off the steam system.
NYSTATE just published, I think last week, the greater than 1.3 megawatt cogen tariff. And I was just reading it last week, and buried in the detail, Con Ed Steam actually has a veto or a way to complain or to actually try and stop that rebate if they think that plant is going to take too much of their steam revenues. And I don't know where that came from. I just saw it last week, and I haven't had a chance to call anybody at NYSTATE yet. Anybody want to comment? NYSTATE guys?
I can comment on that a little. That provision was put in by the commission. He had a concern that CHP not have, it was concerned about the impact that CHP would have on the Con Edison steam system. It asked Con Ed or NYSTATE to come forward with kind of a measure of what impact CHP would have on the system. And when it hits a certain threshold, it's not that it's an automatic, don't go ahead with the project, but it's, hey, make the commission aware of the impact and give them the opportunity if the commission wants to do anything about it. But it's not an automatic.
And there are currently, I think, 15 customers on the steam standby tariff, and I guess it's working for them better than what they would do otherwise.
At the moment, yeah. But I think what Bob has also said is a lot of people are looking at putting boilers in. So they'll back themselves up with boilers because you can pay that project off in a couple of years compared to the cost of the Con Ed steam standby rates.
If questioners could introduce themselves, that would be helpful. Thanks. Sir.
My name is Khalid Youssef. I'm a principal energy engineer with Pyramid Energy Engineering Services. Thanks for a great discussion about rates, standby tariffs for both electricity and steam. But I have a follow-up question regarding natural gas and how the rates may treat compressed natural gas storage on site. As you do your forecasts and the 40 gigawatt target by the president, 800 megawatts in the city, do we have the natural gas infrastructure to provide the proper flow and pressure when needed? And how would compressed natural gas storage be treated from a safety and security standpoint versus tariffs? It could even enhance that rider H if customers procure natural gas when it's less expensive and be able to dispatch it and use it properly for the prime mover and to supplement the HRSG when needed. So how do we think we could move forward with compressed natural gas storage to remove the stress on the natural gas infrastructure?
That's a really interesting question. I think the idea of storage generally is a gray area that I think we're all going to have to be, we'll all be struggling with. So I guess I can only, unless there's somebody in the room who knows more about our thinking on this than me, I'm just going to say I look forward to thinking more about it.
The other thing that might come into play would be city regulations. I don't know how you would store it, et cetera, but I know that they have very strict restrictions on the amount of propane you can store in the city, and if you might run into the same issues there. But other than that, I really don't know.
Well, there are compressed natural gas fueling stations, so the regulations are out there for those, but I'm not sure if they would be applicable to buildings or not. So.
Okay, do we have a question over here? Yes, sir.
Yes, this is Reuben Brown again with a question bringing us from the first panel to this panel. Dana Levy and his colleague mentioned the possibility of getting an extra bonus percentage of incentive for building a redundant capability, and he used the example of 200 kilowatts added to 200 kilowatts or some such number. That's very pertinent for demand response program purposes at both the ISO and at Con Ed. Could the panel comment on where they see that additional machine fitting into the rate structure for standby rates, conventional service, and into demand response? Because if it sets a new contract demand because you have the extra incentive there, we're back to the trap that occurred 2 weeks ago when the commission approved a program for Indian Point relief, assuming 88 megawatts of CHP was going to be available. And at the ISO the next day, they didn't recognize, as the PSC did, that they didn't even have the 88 megawatts into the planning horizon at the ISO. So there's a disconnect between CHP capability and tariffs, as well as the wholesale market. Could you comment?
I don't see an impact on the contract demand, since that's based on the peak load of the building, which wouldn't be affected by having an additional, it's not related to the megawatts of the generation. But it does sound like a good demand response tool, as long as it's an additional reduction of load.
Well, the load wasn't going to increase beyond X, but Mr. Menor pointed out his machine could go to 125 kilowatts instead of 100 kilowatts. Maybe he'll comment on that kind of thing in his panel, but I have a feeling that there's a vacuum here that people aren't looking at as to how we're going to deal with the recognized capability for security purposes or whatever. It's going to be a little larger than load. So I just hope we don't get in the trap where the tariffs demand a pay extra money because we're being good guys?
Well, we just lost a stream of revenue for cogeneration projects with the SCR, where they could actually bid into the demand response pool as distributed generation and be running continuously. And we lost that at the ISO level, went to FERC, anyway, we lost, so.
May 1, FERC approved it, 600 megawatts went away. A week later, the ISO saying it's going to have a 600 megawatt shortfall this summer. I wonder what happened, they said.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's anyone here from the ISO to respond to that issue.
Well, the question is whether baseload DG is providing a demand response resource. And unless it's an incremental change, demand response is meant to provide a change at the time that it's needed. So an incremental change. So Tecogen's additional 25 kW is an incremental change, and so that is a demand response product. Something that's operating base load that isn't going to change its loading at the time is not providing demand response. It's a permanent load reduction, or it can be a permanent load reduction, but it's not a demand response product.
Again, Margaret, people have been getting these payments for the last 5 years and built projects based on it, and we're counting on that revenue stream, and all of a sudden it goes away because the ISO changed their mind.
Well, it would be available in the first year that the machine was built, but following that, their base load would have changed.
But people were getting checks all the way through. I've seen some experts in the room have been working this project more than I have.
And recognizing it was probably not a logical loophole.
I mean, I think you're both right in a sense, and I think that, recognizing the value of the baseload DG is the issue. It's not, I don't think it's being properly recognized at the ISO level now, but they did close that loophole, and, I think the DG community is going to have to try to find a way to replace those revenues.
Yeah, I think it is important to understand how the capacity value is recognized, and it's, there's a mismatch between the wholesale and the retail market. But I think if the LSC's capacity obligation is reduced by the CHP, but that doesn't mean that's being shared with the customer. The LSC is reducing what they bid into the ISO, but we don't know how the LSC is sharing that benefit with the customer.
Right, and I'd like to toss in a slightly different question at this point. Mike, I think you raised this in one of our discussions. Are there lessons we could take from other jurisdictions? Let's come back to, our PSC, state regulation, utility. Can you speak to some of that?
Yeah, most of the other utilities, Northeast, New York is specific, and actually most of Northeast, New York's, I think all of them, all the different utilities, their standby rates look very similar, structurally, at least the ones I've looked at. But the other utilities that we deal in a lot, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Jersey, have all basically done away with the standby tariffs or allow people to opt in, meaning they're not requiring it. I think the decision was made that it was overly complicated, overly burdensome, and it didn't really serve any purpose. When I look at Margaret's slide, basically what she's saying is if you operate well, you can save $40,000 in that one example, which would seem to, I don't understand that, because now if Con Ed has to give you $40,000 to run a cogen, how are they recovering their money? It's all very complicated. I don't see it serving any purpose except for discouraging cogeneration development.
And we had another question over here.
Hi, my name is Rasika. I am a consultant to Rutgers University Center of Energy. To my mind, if we are talking about CHP, then we are also talking about avoided cost of generation, avoided cost of transmission, and avoided cost of emissions. So money saved is money earned. So is there a case of sharing this savings of money with the CHP developers?
You mean Con Ed's sharing the savings with us? They haven't really offered yet.
So the avoided cost of energy, since we're not the energy producer, since we're delinked from the energy supply, they're probably, in that case, if it's less that is being purchased, it's probably suppressing the price, but that's just a pass-through on the energy side. On the emissions side, It depends on what that CHP is costing, and I don't know how we value that. I don't think these machines are subject to RGGI, so there's not really a way that the emissions costs are shared in the current emissions markets. I don't think that's a Con Ed issue, but,
Yeah.
Yeah, those values are not being shared, basically, I mean.
well, they're not, it's not
Well,
valued.
but it's-
They're not being
If you build
valued.
800 megawatts, then you have to produce 800 megawatts less, and I don't think Con Ed's going to share that revenue.
We're not producing 800 megawatts less.
That's correct, I apologize.
So I think we need to wrap it up there, and I will say once again, thank you to our panelists for sharing their expertise. And back to Steve.
Okay, we were going to get to lunch early, and now we've gotten to it a little late. I guess you're hungry. There is food in the back. If you would please take whatever short break you may need and get your food, bring it to your tables. We are going to have our lunch keynote addressed by Katrina Pielli from the DOE. I'm also going to put up a network Wi-Fi access login information up here, so you will be able to use your computers to get to the internet, all right? That'll be going up very shortly. Thank you very much.